Hello and welcome, my creative friends. I'm so glad you're here. I have lots of tips and techniques to share as we create this beautiful mixed media butterfly featuring fabulous little birdie flowers, die cuts, and mixed media products. You'll learn how to create this gorgeous textured background, use stamps and dies to make sweet and inexpensive embellishments, develop a lovely patina finish on this chipboard gear, color odds and ends leftovers to achieve a cohesive look, and add texture with microbeads and glitter. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button if you're new to my channel. To receive notifications of future videos, you can click on the bell icon. I'm recovering from a summer cold, so please excuse my nasal accent in the early part of this video. I found this MDF butterfly at the Dollar Tree. What a bargain to purchase such a beautiful project base for only $1. I had a malfunction taping the first layer of gesso that was applied. Here I'm brushing on the second coat. Be sure to get the sides as well. It's a good idea to prime the base with white gesso. As you know, MDF board is a light brown. The color medium I'll be using is translucent and will show up better against a white background. The gesso also provides tooth, which is a bit of gritty texture that will help any mediums used to adhere to the base. Set it aside to dry or use a heat tool. Let's transform the base with a stamped and colored mixed media background. Once the gesso is dry, add stamping using permanent gray ink. I found a couple older stamps from my stash that worked perfectly, a scroll design over the butterfly body, and a small script stamp to use randomly over the wings. Any similar stamps you might have in your stash will work. I found the sweet spot in the flourish that I thought would look nice over the center of the butterfly. If you don't have gray ink, you could also use second-generation stamping with black ink, which is stamping onto a piece of scrap paper first, then onto the butterfly. With less ink on your stamp, the stamped image will be lighter. Curve the edges of the script stamp around your fingers so that the image will fade away organically at the edges. I'm applying the script image randomly over the wings with no intention of being symmetrical or perfectly straight. Off camera, I set the ink using a heat tool. Sometimes when stamping over gesso, I've noticed that the ink can start to spread, resulting in a blurry image. Heat setting helps to reduce that effect. Now let's add to the background with Brusho colors, which are watercolor powders. I bought a set a while back and really haven't used them that much, so I thought I would pull them out again to color this sweet butterfly. I'm using gray and purple. Start by spritzing the butterfly with plenty of water. You want it to be completely wet, but not puddled. Next, sprinkle the Brusho powder over the base. I'm using the gray over the top wings and purple across the bottom. The two colors will blend into each other, so I'm not concerned about any kind of border between them. The colors will dissolve and expand into the water, creating an organic flowing effect. After applying the Brusho powder, spritz on more water. One of the unique things about Brusho powder is that each one contains a mixture of hues that blend to create the main color. To move some of the paint around, I pick it up with the brush and lay it down in other areas, then add a little more water to blend, rather than using brushstroke motions that would result in the granules being mixed together for one solid color. I ended up with more color than I really wanted, so used a paper towel to blot off some of the excess. These powders come in small plastic containers. A little goes a long way, so rather than opening the lid, it's better to place a push pin in the top of each container. Use this tiny hole to sprinkle on the powder, then replace the push pin to reseal the container. In case you're wondering, I've only used these holes and never opened the lids. I created a color swatch for each one on watercolor paper, then die cut a circle from the swatch to place on top of each jar. Any kind of watercolor medium can be used to color your background. You could even use thinned down acrylic paints, but would need to apply your stamping after coloring. Here at the end, I tilted the butterfly to move the colors to flow beautifully into each other. Once you're happy with the colors, put it aside to air dry. At this point, I had a bit of a dilemma. Watercolors of any kind will reactivate if they re-wet. I plan to use crackle paste through a stencil, which is a wet medium, and will get the color moving and changing again. So you get to learn right along with me one way to seal these colors. The first thing I did was spray the background with a matte, workable fixative. I found that the color still wanted to move quite easily. If you have a fixative that's not workable, that just might work for you. Next, I thought I would try Distress Glaze, which is designed to set water-based distress ink. It was a little better, but the color still moved when I tried adding a little water in an area that would be covered up with embellishments. Rub the glaze on with your finger, then buff it lightly with a soft cloth. Finally, I thought I'd brush over it with clear gesso. This actually moved the color a little, so I was careful to brush over each area only one time in the same direction across the butterfly. Even though it moved the color a little bit, I was very happy with the results, since it filled in a few areas I thought were a little bare. One of those happy mistakes I just adore. Now, if I had started with the clear gesso, which is water-based, it would have most likely blended out that gorgeous background. While the Distress Glaze alone didn't give me the results I was looking for, it did help set the color, so it mostly stayed in place as I brushed on the gesso, so both steps are necessary. I don't believe the spray fixative really helped much at all. Next, we'll add texture using crackle paste through this gorgeous Little Birdie stencil called Butterfly Inspire. Little Birdie has a lovely selection of beautiful stencils. This one is not available in the US store, however my dear followers in India can find it at the Itsy Bitsy store. Sometimes I use the entire design on the stencil, but more often than not, I select the portions that will work best for the project I'm working on. Here I'm using the damask section. Other times when using this stencil, I focused on the sweet butterflies. However, since the base is a butterfly, I chose not to use them again on the background. Apply the crackle paste over the wings, leaving some open space at the edges. I add a little more at the bottom of each wing, then set it aside to air dry. I find that cracks form best when the paste dries naturally. Now let's create some embellishments. You can get a lot of mileage from your pattern papers by cutting and stamping images to tuck into your design. I used a tag die from my stash to cut a tiny tag, capturing the gorgeous butterflies on this paper from the Birds and Berries collection. I simply adore using gears, so I get a lot of use from this Little Birdie Cogs and Wheels die set. I'm using the same purple paper from the Birds and Berries collection that I cut the gears from to stamp a clock image from my stash. I used a dark gray ink first. That was darker than I wanted, so here I'm using a lighter gray color. The first try didn't result in a clear image, but the second one is nice. Placing a piece of foam underneath the paper helps to get a better stamped image. Off camera, I used a circle die to cut out the clock image. Apply gray ink to the edges of the tiny tag. I use a scrap of paper to remove excess ink from the brush before applying it onto the tag. Off camera, I also edged the clock image with this gray ink. Edging die cuts with ink helps give definition so you can see them more clearly on your finished project. Add metallic shimmer and color to the edges of all the die cut pieces with Little Birdie Berry Glaze wax. Use a soft brush to apply the wax to the edges, and then blend by rubbing the wax to soften the color and blend out any harsh edges. I used my fingers, but you could also use a soft cloth or paper towel for the blending. Tie a small piece of jute cord onto the tag. These little details really help give your project a nice finish. I keep a bowl of odds and ends left over from previous projects. I raided this bowl to select some of these orphan bits and pieces to embellish the butterfly, along with a little bee charm from my stash. There's not much cohesiveness to these remnants, so I brush on glazed berries and golden glazed paints to tie everything together. Little Birdie metallic paints are loaded with mica and add a lot of beautiful shimmer while coloring these embellishments. I put small dollops of paint on palettes cut from scraps of plastic packaging. I can blend the paint as I go with no worries of contaminating my paint jars. I start by brushing on gold paint. Then while the gold is still wet, Blend in some of the purple. This gold gives a nice contrast, while the purple helps to coordinate nicely with the background. These pieces are all pretty small, so using tweezers helps keep them in place as I work. While some of these are whole pieces that were either the last of a package or I just never got around to returning to the packaging, others are snippets that were cut off of other pieces. These are great for adding texture and dimension to your clusters. Now let's work with one of these fabulous gears from the Especially Cogs Prime Chipboard set. Start by painting it with golden glaze metallic paint. Heat set or put it aside to dry. I'm going for a patina finish, so next brush on patina glaze metallic wax with a soft brush and rub it into the gold. Brush on some more gold, but make sure to allow some of that gorgeous patina to show through. Most natural patina is uneven and splotchy, so I randomly brush on some Caribbean teal to achieve that effect. To accent the purple on the bits and pieces that were painted earlier, lightly brush over the surfaces with berry glaze metallic wax. We're just adding some highlights and not completely covering the pieces with wax. When applying wax, I like to use a soft brush that has some firmness to it. I find that this makeup brush works perfectly and cleans up nicely with soap and warm water. The die-cut pieces got a little lost against the background, so I'm going back in to brush the edges with gold wax for a little more contrast and definition. I pulled out some lace from my stash to add a soft element. A great way to add color to lace is with mists. Here I'm using Grape Crush Color Splash, which coordinates beautifully with the background. Start by spritzing the lace with water. Pull the lace through the water droplets on the mat until they are just wet with no dry spots. They should be a little more than damp, but not dripping with loads of water. You'll find as you're working with the lace strips that the ends will fray. That's exactly the shabby look we're going for. Spray a spritz or two of Grape Color Splash onto the mat, along with a little water. Dip the centers of the two smaller pieces into the color, then about 3/4 of the lace strips. I'm looking for variation in the color with deeper purple in the center and less color on the ends. Because the lace is wet, it will wick the color and draw it into the area that was not colored. Here I add a small dab of Color Splash to the end of each piece. To add more visual texture, spatter the background with white drawing ink. I prefer this ink because it's thin and easy to spatter but stays a nice opaque white. I find that when I thin down gesso or paint, it can lose some of its opacity. My go-to brush for this technique is a liner brush with long bristles. I place my items to spatter in an old cardboard box. You can tell it is well used. These gorgeous flowers are a mix of blossoms from the Birds and Berries and Fairy Sparkle collections. To soften the color and give them a shabby mixed media feel, dry brush them with white gesso. Now it's time to arrange and adhere the embellishments. Start by placing the lace, which will be the base of the floral cluster. Most of these items will look familiar. I'm also using some lovely berry sprig images from the Birds and Berries ephemera pack. It helps to pre-glue items that will be stacked together, so adhere the clock onto the larger die-cut gear. As I adhered the lace, I adjusted it so the two flat edges meet in a mirror image. Once the lace is adhered, place a loose nest of natural sisal fiber on top of the lace. You don't need to glue down the sisal, since the flowers adhered over it will hold it in place. As I glue down the flowers, I pull out the edges of the sisal so it does not stay hidden behind them. I generally start building the cluster with larger flowers and work out with gradually smaller items, tucking them in as I go. Here I'm adding in the patina gear. Next, arrange the die-cut pieces into the top of the cluster. Since the gear has more contrast and shimmer, it holds more visual weight, so the larger grouping of die cuts gives nice visual balance. Tuck in the lace snippets, then extend the clusters by placing the berry branch images at the edges. Creating a diagonal line across the piece is a lovely design technique that helps move your eye across the butterfly to take in all the pretty elements. Here are those odds and ends, including several items that did not need to be colored, such as pearls, buttons, sequins, pearl drop gems, and rhinestones. While you may not have these exact items in your stash, I'll bet you have your own collection of oddities that will create amazing layering and textures. Here's some music for you as you watch this process with snippets of information along the way. I'll be back to share more techniques once all the embellishments are in place. These gorgeous pink gems are created with Little Birdie Candy Glazed Pearl Drops. You can see how I made these sweet jewels by clicking on the link in the top right-hand corner of the screen. I also have a link to this video in the description box below. Now that all the gems and sequins are in place, go back and add a drop of glue to each one to adhere them to the base. I completed this off-screen. I like to add a little extra bling and texture to fill in around the cluster. Brush on matte gel medium in the desired areas, then sprinkle on Little Birdie Mute Orchid microbeads. I also add some copper microbeads and bronze glass glitter from my stash. Be sure to use an old or inexpensive brush when applying gel medium. It dries fairly fast and isn't always easy to get out of the bristles, even if you clean it right away. I have several brushes set aside just for this purpose. I hope you've enjoyed spending time with me creating this gorgeous mixed media butterfly. Thanks so much for stopping by and taking the time to view this video. I hope you've been inspired to pull out your Little Birdie craft supplies to create a beautiful mixed media piece for your home. You can find a list of Little Birdie supplies used for this card along with a coupon code for their US store in the description below. Here are video links with more techniques for your mixed media creations. Thanks for watching and have a wonderful day. I'll be back soon with another video.